The Cuban Missile Crisis did not erupt from a vacuum. It was the result of a complex web of geopolitical maneuvers and ideological confrontations that had been brewing for years. It was the culmination of decades of simmering tensions between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. These tensions were not just about military might, but also about the very way of life each nation represented. Following World War II, these former allies found themselves locked in an ideological struggle, each championing their respective systems, capitalism and communism. The world was divided, and every nation had to choose a side or risk being caught in the crossfire. This global standoff, known as the Cold War, divided the world into two armed camps, each wary of the other's intentions and capabilities. The Berlin Wall became a stark symbol of this division, a physical manifestation of the Iron Curtain that had descended across Europe. A defining feature of this era was the constant threat of nuclear annihilation. The arms race saw both superpowers amassing vast stockpiles of nuclear weapons, each capable of causing unprecedented destruction. Both the US and the Soviet Union had amassed vast arsenals of nuclear weapons capable of unimaginable destruction. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction, or MAD, meant that any nuclear conflict would likely result in the total annihilation of both sides. This nuclear standoff created a climate of fear and uncertainty, where any miscalculation could have had catastrophic consequences. Civil defense drills became a part of daily life as people prepared for the worst. In this tense atmosphere, events in a small Caribbean island nation would push the world to the brink. Cuba, with its strategic location, became a focal point in this global power struggle. Cuba, led by the revolutionary Fidel Castro, had recently aligned itself with the Soviet Union. This alliance was seen as a direct threat by the United States, given Cuba's proximity to American shores. This alliance, occurring just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, was viewed with deep suspicion by the United States. The presence of Soviet missiles in Cuba was an alarming development that could not be ignored. The Cold War rivalry, fueled by ideological conflict and the terrifying potential of nuclear war, set the stage for the Cuban Missile Crisis. The stakes were higher than ever, and the world watched anxiously as the superpowers inched closer to the brink of war. When the Soviet Union decided to place nuclear missiles on Cuban soil, it was a dangerous gamble in this high-stakes game of power. The discovery of these missiles by American reconnaissance planes brought the world to the edge of a nuclear confrontation. The world held its breath. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a moment of unparalleled tension, where the decisions of a few men could determine the fate of millions. In 1959, Fidel Castro's communist revolution triumphed in Cuba, sending shockwaves through the United States. The revolution marked a significant shift in the political landscape of the Western Hemisphere, as a small island nation just 90 miles from Florida embraced communism. This was a direct challenge to American influence in the region. A communist nation, a mere stone's throw from American shores, was unacceptable to the US government. The proximity of Cuba to the United States meant that any political shift there had immediate and profound implications for American national security and foreign policy. They feared the spread of communist influence in the Western Hemisphere. The US government and its citizens were deeply concerned that Cuba could become a base for spreading communist ideology throughout Latin America, potentially destabilizing the entire region. The US responded with hostility, imposing trade embargoes and backing a failed invasion attempt at the Bay of Pigs in 1961. This invasion, carried out by Cuban exiles with CIA support, was a disastrous failure, and only served to strengthen Castro's resolve and his anti-American stance. These actions only served to push Castro further into the Soviet orbit. Isolated and under threat, Castro sought support from the Soviet Union, which was eager to gain a foothold in the Americas. He saw the Soviets as a powerful ally against American aggression. The Soviet Union provided economic and military aid, bolstering Cuba's defenses and solidifying the alliance between the two nations. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev saw an opportunity in Cuba, a chance to bolster Soviet power and challenge American dominance. By supporting Castro, Khrushchev aimed to extend Soviet influence into the Western Hemisphere and counteract American power. He agreed to provide Castro with military support, including the deployment of nuclear-armed missiles. This bold move was intended to protect Cuba from American invasion and to shift the balance of power in the Cold War. The installation of Soviet missiles in Cuba was a calculated risk by Khrushchev. He believed that placing nuclear missiles so close to the US would deter any American attempts to overthrow Castro and would give the Soviet Union a strategic advantage. He aimed to deter a potential US invasion of Cuba and gain leverage in the Cold War. The presence of these missiles in Cuba was a direct threat to US national security and led to a tense standoff between the two superpowers. However, this move backfired spectacularly, bringing the world closer to nuclear war than it had ever been. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 was a pivotal moment in the Cold War, highlighting the dangers of nuclear brinkmanship and the need for careful diplomacy. In October 1962, American intelligence discovered the presence of Soviet missiles in Cuba. This discovery was made through high-altitude reconnaissance flights, which captured clear photographic evidence of missile installations. This revelation sent shockwaves through the Kennedy administration and plunged the world into a state of high alert. The stakes were incredibly high as the presence of these missiles just 90 miles from the US mainland posed a direct and immediate threat. President John F. Kennedy faced an unprecedented crisis. The young president, already tested by the pressures of the Cold War, now had to navigate the most perilous moment of his administration. The Soviet missiles, capable of reaching major American cities within minutes, represented an existential threat to the United States. The potential for catastrophic loss of life and the destruction of key cities loomed large. Inaction was not an option, but a forceful response carried the risk of all-out nuclear war. The balance between showing strength and avoiding escalation was delicate and fraught with peril. Kennedy assembled a group of advisors, known as the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, or EXCOM, to debate options and chart a course of action. This group included some of the most experienced and trusted figures in American government and military. The deliberations were tense, with hawks advocating for airstrikes and a full-scale invasion of Cuba, believing that a show of force was necessary to deter further Soviet aggression, while cooler heads urged restraint and diplomacy. They argued that a measured response could avoid unnecessary bloodshed and potentially open a path to a peaceful resolution. After days of agonizing deliberation, Kennedy decided on a course of action that combined pressure and diplomacy. He sought a solution that would remove the missiles without triggering a larger conflict. He announced a naval quarantine of Cuba, essentially a blockade to prevent further Soviet shipments, a move that was both bold and calculated, and demanded the removal of the missiles. This decisive action, coupled with intense behind-the-scenes negotiations, ultimately led to the de-escalation of the crisis and the dismantling of the Soviet missiles in Cuba. The world watched with bated breath as the US Navy blockaded Cuba. Soviet ships carrying additional missiles steamed towards the quarantine line. The possibility of a naval clash, potentially escalating into a full-blown nuclear exchange, loomed large. Behind the scenes, frantic diplomatic efforts were underway. Kennedy and Khrushchev, communicating through letters and back channels, desperately sought a way out of the impasse. Both leaders understood the catastrophic consequences of failure. In a dramatic turn of events, Khrushchev blinked first. He agreed to remove the missiles from Cuba in exchange for a US pledge not to invade the island. Secretly, the US also agreed to remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey, a concession not publicly acknowledged at the time. The crisis reached its peak on October 27th, known as Black Saturday, when a US reconnaissance plane was shot down over Cuba, and a Soviet submarine nearly launched a nuclear torpedo. The world held its breath, teetering on the precipice of nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis was resolved peacefully, but its legacy continues to shape international relations to this day. The world learned a valuable, if terrifying, lesson about the perils of nuclear brinkmanship. The crisis highlighted the importance of clear communication and cool heads during moments of extreme tension. The direct communication line between Washington and Moscow, established in the aftermath of the crisis, was a testament to this realization. The Cuban Missile Crisis also underscored the need for diplomacy and compromise in resolving international conflicts. While neither Kennedy nor Khrushchev emerged from the crisis unscathed, their willingness to negotiate undoubtedly saved the world from nuclear catastrophe. The specter of the Cuban Missile Crisis serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of peace in the nuclear age. The lessons learned from this harrowing experience continue to resonate today, reminding us of the importance of dialogue, diplomacy, and restraint in a world still grappling with the existential threat of nuclear weapons.